Hi everyone, and welcome to the GuideWell Insights Lounge. My name is Kate Warnock, and we're coming to you live from the Oliver Wyman Health Innovation Summit. We're here with one of the leaders of the Health Innovation Summit, Terry Stone. Terry, welcome to the interview.
Thank you, Kate. It's always fun.
Well, Terry, you're going to be kicking off this two-day wonderful event where you're convening health industry thought leaders really to talk through all of the impacts around the consumer imperative and how healthcare is transforming from the outside in. So, wonderful event, fantastic themes, and including yourself, speakers that just can't be matched. So, excited to have this, and we'll be streaming live for the next 2 days. So, excited to have you join us.
Well, thank you. We're excited once again to have you sponsoring this great effort.
So, Terry, your position with Oliver Wyman, you're the global managing partner for the Health and Life Sciences practice. Big position, and again, you're starting with opening this summit, talking about the consumer, obviously, and we've been talking about the consumer in the health industry for a long time, yet we still seem to lag behind other industries. Why is that? And what can we do to fix it?
You know, that's a great question. I think in the last 3 years, in some way, shape, or form, we've touched on this each year about where are we and why are we kind of stuck. So that actually is a key part of why we focus the conference on what we have this year, because healthcare does seem to be a little bit stuck. And I think it's a great question. We've given a lot of thought to it. And I'll start by the first most basic premise being healthcare has always been it's a B2B industry. It always has been, right? Versus a real business to consumer industry. So in B2B businesses, I mean, really health plans we're selling to largely employers, right? Quite frankly, provider systems we're negotiating with health plans, and quite frankly, the consumer in some ways was an afterthought, okay? But that sounds a little overly simplistic, like, okay, so it's B2B, now we have to be B2C, but I think it's really important that people understand what happens when you're in a B2B market versus a B2C, and why does it make it so difficult to change? So first of all, in a business-to-business market, your buyer's often buying on a lot more like rational, logical reasons. You also have very sophisticated buyers buying a complicated service. And in some ways, unintentionally, I would argue, the product gets more complicated as each side tries to prove to one another that they're adding more value, right? It's almost the antithesis of what you need for the consumer. Right. And that's just a really hard paradigm to break. And that actually is pervasive through most of healthcare. I'd argue the drug industry is probably the closest to having found its way once it had access to direct-to-consumer advertising, which gets a lot of backlash for a lot of reasons. But they're one of the first parts of healthcare that's really started to have to embrace what it is about the consumer and what they need, and how do I meet them where they are.
Terrific. All right, let's go into our next question then. How important is it for organizations to really understand the full ecosystem and be able to connect the dots? Another theme here at the summit.
Sure. We talk a lot about the ecosystem in healthcare. I mean, it's funny, we talk about the healthcare system in the US. And I think someone said it great once where they commented that we don't have a system. What we have is a bunch of parts and pieces that are all stuck together, and you get this sort of random ecosystem, if you will. And I think it's really, really important that players in the space understand where they sit in the ecosystem and how the consumer views it, and how the consumer thinks about interacting with the parts and pieces, and how you stitch it together in order to add value to the consumer and simplify their life, while also making sure you carve out a spot for yourself that's sustainable where you can make money, because many of these are, commercial enterprises. Sure. And I'll give you a slight example of something in an analogous industry that I think is important in comparing to healthcare. And I'd argue it's never good when you're compared with a downward comparison to the airline industry. But I want to explain why it's important to connect the ecosystem, right? Like, in the rest of our lives, we expect as consumers that when we're going to get a good or service, the pieces work together. Okay? Imagine if American Airlines didn't want to share its data so you couldn't find out on Expedia what was available. Imagine if, American Airlines doesn't control air traffic control. That's controlled by the government or the airport. Imagine if they just said, well, we're not alerting you to a delay if it happens to be caused by weather or something which we don't control, because that's not our job. Right? Imagine if they asked you, the consumer, to choose, do you want Pilot John or Pilot Susie? These are their credentials, et cetera. And that's exactly what we do in healthcare. Right. So we've taken the complexity of the system that is essentially grown from the ground up, and we have kind of foisted it upon the consumer. And then now we're scrambling to try and unravel it. But it's almost backwards, and that's why you have to start with a blank sheet of paper.
Okay, well, let's start with that blank sheet of paper then. Who do you think is most in the best position to really disrupt the health market?
Right. And again, it's sort of the, I don't know, $10 billion question. I think if I knew specifically who, I probably wouldn't be sitting here and I'd be betting my money on someone else. But I will speak kind of categorically that in my role, I see lots of players in healthcare. I cut across payers, providers, life science companies, health services, and tech innovators. And what I have kind of strongly come to believe is that most likely the disruption that really changes things is going to come from the outside. So healthcare is in some capacity going to be Airbnb'd or Uberized. And by that I don't mean Uber for health. I mean somebody out of left field takes an industry that's kind of not delighting the stakeholders and has excess waste in it, and it's going to kind of disrupt and shake it out. And that could be in the form of now the Apples or the Googles of the world, right? It could be the Walmarts of the world, you know? The average Walmart consumer, I believe, goes in more than twice a week, over 100 times a year. How did they start, if you start getting traction with people who have that frequent a touch with you, there's a lot you wind up doing. And I think when I advise my clients, I say you should be watching for the people on the fringe, not your competitor down the street.
Right. Well, all right, so our final question for you, Terry. Tee up for us the next couple days as far as the speakers, maybe the people that you're most excited to see.
Sure. Well, okay, I've had a hand in a lot of it with the team, so I'm actually excited about all of it. But that being said, I think what others should expect to see and what I am excited about overall is the idea that I think we're kind of tipping into a new era of what's going on in healthcare. And we kind of dragged healthcare players a little bit kicking and screaming into this next generation world. The government kind of foisted and regulated it upon us. It kind of pulled people in and they realized they had to adapt. Then all of a sudden, you know, Silicon Valley and others started pouring money into healthcare and innovators were springing up left and right. And I think we're now getting into the era in healthcare where it's about business model disruption and reinvention. We're having massive amounts of consolidation. You got everybody and their brother often pulling out of ACA, right? Creating a lot of structural challenges. And even the startups, I think the investment in the startup category started to plateau, and you're gonna see a lot more consolidation of what's going on. So what we're hoping to achieve this year is going beyond the basic part of innovation, which is, oh, what's that company do? Or what's that technology? Or that seems really neat. And actually what we've been striving to do for the last couple of years is get underneath what's the magic in what makes that company special? What is it that makes it stick? Why are consumers delighted? And how do we get beyond the basics of the functions and the features and figure out what it is that really makes it sing and really makes it kind of win? And I think that's a lot of what we'll be sharing. So we'll be talking not only about innovator companies, but about culture, about mindset, about how do you drive behavioral change in consumers. So it's just going to cut all across the board, and we're really excited about how we think it will help our clients, help other stakeholders in the healthcare industry actually have more impact and delight their customers.
Well, Terry Stone, I mean, it's always a pleasure for GuideWell to be part of this magnificent event. And I want to thank you for your time. I know you've got a very full day ahead of you, but appreciate that you spent some time with us here in the GuideWell Insights Lounge. So best of luck.
Thank
Keep
you.
your energy
We're
up for the
excited.
next couple days. We know that you will. And my name is Kate Warnock. Thanks so much for watching.